Hello watercolor lovers, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. Sometimes a walk to a grocery store can inspire you. While I was walking, I saw this magnificent evening light inspired me to paint this painting. I wish I had my easel with me, but I took this reference on my phone so I can paint later. If you're an artist looking for inspiration, a walk is all you need, and it also healthy too. Before we get on to it, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. As you guys know, I always provide drawing template and reference, so you guys can follow and come up with your own beautiful paintings and impressions. Check the video description to download the templates. So let's start with the light wash. So at the top there's a little bit of greenish cobalt blue in it, so I started with the B. So as soon as it comes to the bottom, I use yellow ochre, and since it's an evening painting, there is a lot of warmer tones happening in our painting. So I'm using cadmium orange, and as it comes down, I want to make it a little bit darker. So I'm using Winsor violet and a little bit of cadmium orange in it. But as it comes down, I want to create this evening glow in it. So I'm using a lot of cadmium orange to create that glow at the distance. While I'm doing this, I make sure that I'm not going over my streetcar or the tram or else any of the cars and objects or people in our painting. So I'll bring it all the way to the ground plane or the ground. And you can also see there's also like a white round signal there, so I also make sure to not to paint over it. Let's connect the ground now. So for the ground, I'm using a warmer tone. I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of neutral tint in it, so I'm getting a warmish tone, as you can see in our reference. So on the road we have two colors in it. So there is like a warmer grayish tone and there is also a neutral bluish tone there. So I make sure to do that. So what I'm trying to do now is taking a clean brush and a little bit of water in it and trying to create directional lines. So this will create an illusion of perspective in our painting, and it also helps us to lead into the painting as well. So there is a little bit of assistance, so I sprayed a little bit of water in my ground, so it kind of gives a variety of edges and textures in our painting. So now I'm taking pure neutral tint and I'm trying to take that from the foreground to the background. And there's also a platform which is on the left hand side of our painting, so I also added that as well. So I'm trying to lift out some of the painting to get that lane lines in our painting. We are officially done with our first wash, so now let's jump on to the building at the background. So in reality, in the reference, you can see it has a darker value in it, but I want to push this building far away so that it creates a sense of depth in our painting. So for the building, I started with the Winsor violet, a little bit of French Ultramarine blue in it, and I make sure to leave highlights for the windows and balconies in the building. So, and I also add a darker value at the top, so it gives a really good silhouette for the skyline. So the next step would be I'm using clean water at the background. So now I throw on a lot of cool colors in it, so that it kind of gives the illusion of mood and atmosphere in our painting. As it comes to the bottom, I'm going to introduce a lot of darker tones, and it also helps us to silhouette our cars and people in our painting. For the darker pigments, I'm going to use a lot of French Ultramarine blue and Payne's gray and a little bit of Sepia at the bottom. While I do this, I make sure that I broke my edges and I make sure that it kind of looks loose because there's a tree underneath it. But as it comes to the bottom of that, I'm going to increase my pigment consistency. What I mean by that is less water and more pigment in my brush. So I'm also adding a little bit of French Ultramarine blue and a little bit of neutral tint in there to get the darker value in there, so that it also silhouettes the cars in there. So now let's jump onto the building. For the building, the first wash would be a little bit of cadmium orange. I'm adding a little bit of red in it, so it creates a little bit of warmth. So I also flipped my canvas so that I don't go over my streetcar. Sometimes I do that to get the stray edges. As you can see, I built up the pigment for the top part too, because it's going to be behind the skyline, so I want a darker pigment on top of my building. So for the top of the building, I use French Ultramarine blue and add a little bit of Alizarin Crimson in it. Now let's focus on the first focal point in our painting. So the first focal point would be the streetcar. In certain countries they call it tram, but in Canada they call it a streetcar, especially in Toronto. So this streetcar is usually really good on roads in city of Toronto because it has this beautiful red and white color scheme in there. So it kind of like whenever I paint, most of the paintings I have my streetcar in there. It's kind of like my signature, I guess. So I'll start with the first light wash. So for the light wash, I'm using cadmium red and Payne's gray. So on the sides, as you can see in the reference, it's kind of like a little bit of whitish, bluish color in it. So I'm using Chinese white. I'm mixing a little bit of Winsor violet in it so that I kind of get this cool whitish tone in my brush. So I'm just taking it all the way. And in the front of the glass, for the glass I'm using Payne's gray. So this is the light wash. So it looks dark now, but it will dry out really fast. As it dries out, it gets lighter. Once I'm happy with it, I'm just going to add a little bit of darker value at the back of the streetcar, and even in the front there is also a little bit of value there. So I'm going to have Payne's gray and a little bit of Chinese white in it. So once I'm happy with it, I'm taking clean water. At the top, I'm just rubbing it off so that I get that rounded edge on top of my streetcar. And I also add a little bit of cadmium orange on top of my streetcar to get that warmth highlight in my streetcar. So now I'm jumping onto the tree. For the trees, I'm using Sepia, and I'm just mixing a little bit of French Ultramarine blue at the bottom. When painting trees, treat them as a flat shape instead of looking for the leaves, branches and everything in it. And you also make sure to use a dry brush technique than a wet brush, because when you use dry brush you get this beautiful loose edges you can't get with a wet brush technique. So as it comes down, I'm introducing a lot of darker pigment so that it kind of holds against our streetcar. So now let's rotate our canvas, and I'm going to take a lot of French Ultramarine blue and a little bit of NeutralTint in it. And I'm going to mix a lot of colors where the streetcar meets the trees. So this will give a lot of darker pigment in the foreground, and it also brings everything forward as well. Once I'm happy with it, I want to make sure that I connect those darker pigments in the midground and the background as well. So since I have darker pigment, I'm just like throwing some darker pigments where the car meets. And sometimes I use this technique, so I use my nails to create this highlights for the buildings as well as some wires and stuff. When you do this, they always say watercolors can be poisonous, so a matter of fact doing it several times, I'm still alive, so I would say proceed with caution. Once I squint my eyes, I saw that the values in the streetcars are not aligning, so I glazed over it again with NeutralTint. And I'm also jumping on to the figures. I used cadmium orange for it. Since I have orange in my brush, I also used it for the taillights. So I gave some colors for the shirt, and I also had a darker pigment on the left hand side. And there's also the sign, which is also super white, so I also glazed over it. And the figures in the foreground dried quite a bit and glazed over it again. For the flags, I'm using cadmium red, and in the middle I used a little bit of yellow ochre in it. And when I squinted my eyes, I noticed that the values on the road look super dull. So I glazed with yellow ochre and a little bit of NeutralTint in it so I can get warmth. So now I'm jumping onto the tail light. So I'm using red and a little bit of white paint in my brush. And I'm also throwing it here and there. So now I'm jumping on to the signs on the streetcar. And since I have the brush, white paint in my brush, I'm also throwing in some of the highlights here and there, like where I'm seeing in my reference. To get the glow look in my front of my streetcar, so I used white paint and I rubbed over with my fingers, so it kind of gives like a glow in my streetcar in the front. And since I have a lot of white in the brush, and I'm keep on building up my highlights wherever I see it. So sometimes I do this, I use my credit card to scrape off some of the painting, and you could see I'm also using a credit card to get some of the highlights and the background as well. And if I'm not happy with it, sometimes I take tissue paper and get rid of it. I'm keep building up highlights in my painting using this technique, but don't go overboard with it. It's just a technique, whenever sometimes you want to do it, you could do it because it's really fun to do it. I usually sometimes go overboard with it. So once I'm happy with everything, I thought it would be nice to have a peaking shadow in the foreground, so it kind of like takes us into the painting. So once I glazed over it, I'm using tissue paper and I'm letting the paint run through in the painting. Since I have some darker pigment in my credit card, so I'm going to use that as for directional lines on the tracks for on the road. The pigment tends to be a little bit darker, so I'm using tissue paper to get rid of it. So then I'm going to take Payne's Gray with a darker tone, and I'm kind of going to add some directional lines, and I'm also adding a little bit of light reflecting on the tracks as well. And I also saw there was some of the highlights were missing, so I'm also adding that as well. So I'm also flipping my canvas here and there to get a straight line and directional lines in our painting. And that's it, folks. We are almost at the end of our painting journey. If you're an artist or a person who enjoys moody paintings, I created a playlist especially for you guys. Please feel free to check it out. Thanks again for watching this video tutorial with me. Let me know what you learned from this video and what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, let me know in the comments or write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.